Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today I want to talk to you about how to build your own custom battery packs using the Sony VTC6 18650 battery cell. These are fantastic options for getting a lot of extended flight time on your quadcopter, or you could use them for pretty much any other application. You just have to be careful not to overdraw the amps. This is a 30 amp max burst rate on the output power. I believe the continuous power is around 10 or 15 amps. But for my application, these are going to work perfectly as long as you don't fly too hard. Let's just jump right into it and I'll show you everything that you need to build these.
Okay, to get started, you're going to need some tools. The first thing that you're going to need for sure is a soldering iron. Make sure you have a nice soldering iron that gets up to the temperature that your solder melts at. I'm using the lead-free solder. The next thing you're going to need is obviously your battery cells. So in this case, we're making a 4S 3000 milliamp pack using the Sony VTC6 18650 batteries, but you can do this exact same thing with something like the 21700s, the Molicel 21700s. These are fantastic cells as well. I used these on a larger 7-inch to get about a 45 amp max draw rate on the output amps, and they work really well. So it doesn't have to be 18650s. It could even be smaller ones for some totally different application. Now that you've got your battery cells, you're going to need a balance connector. This is a 4S balance connector. This is going to allow each one of these cells to be balanced correctly by your lithium ion charger. And then in my case, I'm using the XT60 connector. So I've got some of these right here. And you're also going to need some main lead silicone wire. This is 12 gauge, but you can use a little bit thinner if you feel like you need to, or if you're going to use this with an XT30, you can use the correct XT30 silicone wire. But if it's a little bit too big, don't worry about it. It's just going to add a little bit of extra weight, not a big deal. The other thing you're going to need is some of this tin strips. You don't have to use these. You can actually use just straight old wires, but these tend to make it a lot cleaner when you're wrapping your final battery build and you're just assembling everything. So the first thing that I do is I take the battery cells and obviously mark them with plus and minus. On these type of cells, you have your positive at the top and your negative at the bottom. So I'll just go ahead and just mark plus, minus. It's really important to plan this out very well before you start building, because you don't want to accidentally solder you don't want to solder the two positives together and the two negatives together. That will cause the cell to explode. So just be really careful with how you're planning this out. Right, so we marked positive and negative. Now, because this is a 4S, we ideally want this to be perfectly square so that it will fit on our quad. We could go ahead and set them up like this and have all of the positives at the top and all the negatives at the bottom, but that's not going to make for a very clean wiring structure, right? We're going to have to do a plus to a negative to a plus to a negative. We're just going to have to use all this extra material. So what we want to do is flip every other cell. So now we can follow a very logical path for the energy to follow, right? Because a cell like this works by putting each cell in series. So that's how we get the 14.8 volts, because each one of these is 3.4 volts. So what I'll do is I'll just take the positive, find the negative, positive, and just put them side by side like this. So now we have a positive goes to negative, goes to positive, goes to negative. So I'll take my hot glue, just do a little strip, Lay them nice and flat, lay them nice and even, and combine them together. Perfect. Now we'll do the exact same thing with the other two. Lay them nice and flat, get them really close, and connect them together. Now, what we want to do is take these two and combine them together, but we don't want to put them in the same direction. You don't want them to look like this. You want them to look like this. So you want positive, negative, positive, negative. So now what we'll do is take a nice strip of hot glue on the top and just line them up, get them really nice and flat and straight. And there, now we have the basic frame of our 18650 pack. Okay, now the next step is to sort of map out how the energy is going to come out of the cell. So this is a positive. So the next step is to map out how the energy is going to come out of the cell. So this is a positive and this is a negative. We want the energy to flow from positive to negative. So we want negative, I mean, this is not the correct way to really look at electronics, but it makes it really easy if you think about it like a river. You want the negative particles to come in and go from negative to positive, negative to positive, negative to positive. So what we'll do is just mark here a big plus. That's our main positive lead. And then we'll do a big negative for our main negative lead, right? So now what we're going to do is plan out how we need to attach this tin so that each one of these cells follows in accordance and we end up with 14.8 volts. So what you can do is now this is our positive, main positive lead. We're going to draw straight down. The energy is going to flow this way. And then we're going to go like this right here. Now we have to go straight because this is positive to negative to positive. And we're going to draw straight up to negative, come around, go to positive, go straight down to negative, and then over to positive. I hope I didn't make that super complicated, but it's very, very easy. You'll see as we start building it. So here's our main positive lead, here's our main negative lead. So what we're going to do is follow it, positive to negative to positive to negative to positive to negative to positive. So let's just start it here so you can see how this works. So this is our original top position. And we're going to follow it down to our first connection. So we'll take a piece of our tin and we will just cut it so that it's about half the size, just like this. You can see that fits over about halfway on either side. So what we'll do here is just grab some of our solder, get our soldering iron nice and hot, I like to get a bunch on there when I'm doing the first one. With this first little dab of solder, you're not really going to get it to be secure. You just want it to kind of be enough to sort of hold down the piece. There we go. That's fantastic. So we'll add a little bit more onto here just to make sure we have a nice secure connection. And just while you're doing this, just kind of give the side of the battery a little bit of a feel to make sure that you're not holding the soldering iron on here for too long. You want your soldering iron to be nice and hot so you can just get in and get out. Now we'll connect this side. See, we'll add a lot of solder there and just sort of move it around. Let it get a nice foothold. There we go. Now we've connected our first joint. So we got to remember here that our main positive is right here. So we go positive to negative. Now those are connected. Negative to positive. We'll go up. And now we're going to connect this negative to this positive. Okay? So we'll take another piece of our tin. We'll just cut it till it's about half the size. Be careful when you're using your scissors that you're not bridging the connection either, because that can end up with sparks. All right, now we'll just go ahead and do the exact same thing that we just did. So we'll get our soldering iron tip nice and saturated with solder. Sort of hold this guy down here. There we go. That's a nice looking flat joint. We'll get some more solder. Perfect. That's a really nice looking joint right there too. And just give your cells a little feel to make sure that they're not getting too hot and you're not holding the iron on. If your iron's not getting hot enough, you might need to consider getting a new iron or different solder, because that's one problem that I had in the past, is that if I used a cheap soldering iron and I couldn't get the solder hot enough, it would just make a big old mess and it would get the battery super hot. So just be careful that you're not holding the soldering iron on for too long. So now we've got our main positive lead here. Follow it down, negative to positive, follow it up, negative to positive, follow it down, negative to positive. So this should be our last joint right here. So we'll cut another piece. These don't need to be super long, and you want to definitely make sure that they're not hanging over the side. You don't want it like this. you want it to be halfway. That way it'll give it a nice connection when you're adding the solder. So we'll go ahead and just get some more solder. Add it liberally here. Let it flow around. And that's a great looking joint. We'll do the same thing over on this side. Always put solder on your tip before you touch it to the battery. There we go. That's a nice looking joint. So now we have the final raw battery pack that's going to give us our 14.8 volts. Just to be sure, we'll go ahead and take our multimeter and what we'll do is go to positive, negative. These cells are at storage voltage, so that's why they say 13.8. But once you charge them up, obviously you'll get the correct amount of voltage. So putting the leads on here and checking the voltage gives us a good indication that it's correct, right? Because if it wasn't, we would probably have smoke and all kinds of other stuff. As you're connecting it, if you notice sparks, immediately stop and rethink your layout because something's wrong. So now that we've got our pack, what we want to do is focus on making our main leads, okay? So we have our 18650 connector, right? Let's go ahead and make our main leads. To do this, I'm going to use a set of helping hands because I find that it helps me. If you've never made a lead, you can actually purchase these ready-made online. So, you know, you can save yourself that step, although they do cost a little bit more than just the raw materials. But I'll just show you how to make an XT60 lead here. So we'll take our negative and just strip the end. We'll take our positive and strip the end. Use our helping hands to let us just tin the tip of this negative really well. When I see people that try to make these and they end up coming apart, it's typically because they're not tinning the raw wire well enough before they connect it. So you want to make sure that you get a lot of tin on the wire. So we'll get it nice and hot. And as you're tinning it, you'll notice that the wire starts to suck the solder down into it. So that seems to be pretty good. Try to bring this up to show you. Okay. Now we'll do the exact same thing to the negative lead. These wires are probably a little bit too thick for this application, but I keep them around because I'm also involved in remote control trucks and a lot of other different hobbies, and it's just kind of a good standard size. So let me see if I can show you this here. This has a lot of nice solder on it. Okay, now the next thing that we'll do is take our XT60, and I'll just use my helping hands here to get it plugged in. One thing to remember with XT60 is that the flat side of the XT60 is always positive and the curved side is always negative. So make sure that you're soldering to the correct side. So to get started on this, we'll take our solder and we'll start with the positive side. So we'll take our solder and just add just enough inside the lead to just sort of coat it. Then what we'll do is get our soldering iron nice and saturated with solder, and we'll take our lead, give it a nice firm grip, and just let the whole thing get nice and hot. And you should feel it start to sort of fall down into there we go. You'll feel it start to fall down into the lead itself. So this one had a little bit extra solder on it. Probably didn't need quite that much solder, but these wires are so big. So I don't know if you can see that. If there's a little bit of extra solder, you can always try to take your soldering iron and soak some of it up, or get it a little hot and then just whack it off. So now what we'll do is move along to the negative side. Because remember, the flat side is always positive. So we'll do the exact same thing that we did before. Get some solder in there, just enough to coat the inside. We'll take our lead. Trying to do this so that you guys can see. Oh, you can't see there. Whenever you're doing this, always be patient with yourself, right? If this thing gets a little bit too hot, it's not going to hurt it. So don't worry about trying to work too quickly. Just really be patient with yourself. Give yourself the time to go ahead and do it correctly. So that's a little bit hot. Just be careful because they get real hot. And then just make sure that you've got your flat side is positive and your curved side is negative. And if you're not sure, just go ahead and look at a drone and, see, does that match up? Okay, yeah, it does. Great. So now I'm going to go ahead and just connect this little protection plastic. And we've got a nice lead. Look at that. Looks great. Looks like it came out of a little Asian shop somewhere in China. All right. Now the next thing I'm going to do is just make sure that our leads are both the same length. And then I'm going to strip both sides Perfect. So when I solder these ones, I try to fan them out a little bit so that they'll sit a little bit flatter. So you can see how it's a little bit fanned out. And the same with the positive side. If you have smaller gauge wires, you might not have to do this, but I find that this helps get a little bit of a better connection. And then you can just take your battery, set it right on there, get your soldering iron, and continue to tin both sides of the main lead. Don't worry about putting too much on here. It's just going to make your connection stronger. Do the same thing with this side. And just add as you see it start to flow into the wires. Easy. So now the next step is to get our positive to our positive and our negative to our negative. So to do that, we'll take some solder and just get a nice pool built up on both sides of the main connection lead points. There we go. While you're doing this, just give the side of the battery a little feel to make sure that you're not letting it get too hot. All right, now the next step is get your soldering iron nice and saturated with a lot of solder. Get something to hold your main leads with and just position it right over top like this and let it get nice and hot. There we go. See it starting to melt there? Perfect. Now we'll do the same thing to the other side. If the side of your battery is getting so hot that you can't touch it, you should probably stop. I'm talking like it's about to burn you. There we go. And now we have a nice, strong main connection. Now check your work using a multimeter to make sure that you've put these on the correct way. Obviously, it should be the exact same. Positive 13.9. So they are looking good. I think when they heat up just a little bit, they get a little bit more voltage. I don't know. I could be wrong. All right. Now, the last and final step is adding the balance connector. So this is a weird one. It's like an extension for a 4S. So I'm going to cut it like that. Now I want this balance connector to come up like this. So it follows the same direction. So what you can do, you want the positive to start on the positive, and then you follow down every connection until you end with the negative on the negative lead. So the first thing that we can do is just measure here. We'll cut the first one to the same length as the last one. And then we'll strip the end of the wire, strip the end of the wire, and then we'll go ahead and tin these two. Great. Now we'll just position this right here. And just let it get enough solder melted on there so that it sinks down into that main lead soldering joint. And that will give you a really nice and strong balance connection. There we go. And we'll do the same thing with the other side. Just find a nice spot tucked away. You want to try to have everything be lower than the main lead. That way it'll give you a smoother wrap when you're finishing. Great. Now what we're going to do is follow along the line, just like in my replacing a balance lead video, and we're going to solder a balance lead wire to every connection. So we're going to do one right here on this connection. We're going to do the next one on the next connection, and then we're going to do the one after that on the final connection, which is down here. So just make sure that you have enough wire and you're routing it down correctly. Ooh, I did this one perfect. So we'll strip this wire. Always tin. Okay. Double check that you're putting it in the right spot. And continue that same method. So we've got positive to positive, the next one to the next joint, and follow the joints. Now we have the next one in line, goes straight here. And now the final one attaches to the other side of the bottom. Come on, meow. And I'm actually going to route this one through the center, like this. And now we are complete with our raw pack. So we've got 4 cells, we've got our main power lead, we've got our balance lead, which comes up nice and tidy right underneath the main lead. And now the final step is to get some PVC shrink wrap, or in my case duct tape, and just give it a nice wrap, and we'll end up with a nicely polished 4-cell lithium-ion battery pack.
So that wasn't hard, right? Pretty easy. I hope you guys enjoyed that. These are great little packs. I'm about to test these ones and see how long I can get on my little custom built Flywoo Explorer and see how long I can fly. So I hope this helped you. Please be safe, be careful when you're doing this kind of stuff, and let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks.